Full toss. They go for the single this time. A throw and a miss. They're going to get back for two. India are home. Lords goes wild.
And welcome to Sports Gazette Audio and to this, our cricket podcast, where we discuss those remember where you were moments. With excitement building for the ODI series between India and England that kicks off on the 23rd, today we're looking back rather than looking forward as we chat about India's win over England in the Natwest Series final way back in July 2002. It's a tale full of drama, humour and everything in between as India successfully chased a monumental 326 to win the match by 2 wickets with just 3 balls left.
It's Ganguly with his shirt off, Flintoff style this time. Mohammad Kaif not out 87. India have won the Natwest Series final by 2 wickets here at Lords in one of the most incredible one-day matches the country has ever seen.
I'm Hermione Hatfield, and to relive all the key moments of that 2002 final, I'm joined by Nakul Pandey, broadcaster for Guerrilla Cricket, and Yuvraj, Bhatia, cricket editor for the Sports Gazette. Thanks for coming on, guys. I'm excited to hear your takes on this remarkable final, and I have to start by asking, can you remember where you were that day? Nakul, why don't you kick us off?
I remember very vividly where I was. I was sitting in my parents' front room. I would have been 11 years old at the time. I was not feeling very well. I was lying down on the sofa watching this game. And my dad was on his way back from a business trip, but had been delayed at Amsterdam airport. He hadn't thought much of this because India weren't expected to win going into this game. India hadn't won a lot of finals. India didn't win very much away from home. England were kind of strong. It had just won, or just drawn a series rather, in India. But then as the game went on and as it got more exciting, I'm not quite sure how my dad managed to find out what was going on, because he started asking me over text. I remember my Sony Ericsson phone, which was so old that it came with a separate camera, which was a little bolt-on webcam, and this tiny little keypad with its pay-as-you-go minutes, my first ever mobile phone, and he was asking me for over-by-over updates. In many ways, it was an early step into cricket journalism, completely by accident.
For me, it was my 6th birthday. I was in India, in Calcutta, where I've grown up, and I distinctly remember I was dressed in a bunny rabbit outfit for my 6th birthday. All my friends had come, we were downstairs, it was a nice evening. It was approaching nighttime, and then my friends go, oh, let's see what's happening in the final upstairs. So now I used to live on the 2nd floor in this building. All my friends have gone up to the 2nd floor. I get into the lift in my bunny rabbit outfit, and my lift gets stuck. And I'm just crying and crying. And basically the building manager called my dad up and he said, can you come down? Your son is crying. He's stuck in the lift. And my dad said, no, India is playing. And it looks like it's going to be a close game. So he just refused to help me. And then the guard let me out and I went in and made it just in time for the last couple of overs. But I will never forget that day in my life.
Over the next 20 minutes, we'll be looking back at the extraordinary build-up to the final, discussing how India's young guns made such an impact, and delving into that iconic Ganguly shirt-swinging moment. But first up, I think we need a bit of context. This final on July 13th was not the first clash between the two sides in 2002. In the Natwest Series itself, they went into the final level, with one win against the other, alongside a no result due to rain stopping the play. Rewind the clock even further, and England had been out in India for an ODI series in January and early February, which resulted in a 3-all tie. England won the last match of that series by 5 runs, with Andrew Flintoff taking the crucial final wicket. How did he celebrate? By taking his shirt off to swing it around his head.
The series had gone well. The Natwest Series final had gone well. It was a tri-series, which was a common feature of English summers back then, between India, England and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had been a non-factor in the tournament, which was a little bit surprising. They had quite a strong team, probably a stronger team than England on paper. England were a weird one-day team at the time. They had a lot of very talented players, but were going through probably the depths of their period of not taking white ball cricket seriously enough. In 1999, a few years before, they'd hosted the World Cup, but had been knocked out of the World Cup before the official theme tune had been released, and were abject, really. Hadn't made a significant impact in a World Cup final since 1992 when they got to the final. India were kind of a team in transition. They'd just come out of a major match-fixing scandal a couple of years earlier. Sort of Ganguly was just coming to his own as captain. They'd just beaten Australia the year before in a memorable series, one of the most famous Test series of all time in India. But were still really developing this team and really developing as a team that could win away from home, which they hadn't done at all really during the 90s, a really abject record. And it's still taken them a little while. Even now, it's a big deal when India win at home. So both teams were in a slightly odd place in terms of their cricketing development. Certainly, you can say that looking back with hindsight.
Saurav Ganguly, the best thing he did was identify early the youngsters he wants in his team. People don't realize when India won the World Cup in 2011, a lot of those players who won the World Cup had made their debut under Saurav Ganguly. So he was building something quite special there. And I think, like he mentioned, the series of 2001, India versus Australia. One of the games that happened was in Kolkata, the 281 that VVS Lakshman got, that massive partnership with Rahul Dravid. I think that's the series that gave the Indian team belief, because it was the mighty Aussies with Steve Waugh and those superstars of the game all playing. That gave India the belief that they can actually do something with that squad. And you could see the effects of that in 2002.
Would you guys say that there were any tensions between the English players and the Indian players leading into this final, following those clashes they'd had earlier in the year?
I don't know if there were tensions so much between the England and Indian players, but there was certainly tension between Andrew Flintoff and Saurav Ganguly. And this goes back to a year that Saurav Ganguly spent as Lancashire's overseas player. Lancashire had this long history of their overseas players being very integrated with the team, very integrated with the culture of the club. Farouk Engineer in the 1970s ended up settling in Lancashire. Clive Lloyd, who came over at the same time, ended up settling in Lancashire. Then through the 90s, Wasim Akram and Mutaya Muralidharan. Wasim was already a superstar, Murali was becoming one, but both embraced the club and were massively popular figures. Saurav Ganguly was never going to be like that. Saurav Ganguly had grown up in this very privileged environment. He'd been thrown into this leadership role quite young. He'd always been someone who could get his way. He was very well politically connected.
Yeah, just to give some context, obviously having grown up in Kolkata myself, I played under coaches who've played alongside Saurav Ganguly. The stories that have come out are quite funny, because obviously John Wright's book, My Indian Summer, he wrote about it as well, that when he entered the Indian dressing room, there was always this culture of the senior players getting their bags carried on by someone else. And this was started under Saurav Ganguly when he was playing at Bengal. Basically, his father was quite a wealthy, well-connected man in Calcutta. He's obviously known as the Prince of Calcutta for that reason. And basically, he would always have one guy carrying his bag for him throughout. And he believed that was the norm, because that's just how he had grown up. When he came to Lancashire, like Nakul said, that was obviously what he thought would happen. He thought he's the star, he's the overseas player. This is how he's grown up, and this is how he's always going to be.
In his very first game, he takes off his sweater and asks Michael Atherton, who had not long been removed from the England captaincy and was a regular of the England team, to take his sweater to the boundary. Athers, being a nice man, did, but wasn't very happy about it. He would ask players to carry his kit. He wouldn't take part in full training sessions. If he got hit in the nets, he would decide, right, that's me done. And this left an impression on Andrew Flintoff, who was coming through at the time at Lancashire and was very much about the team environment, obviously a local boy from Preston. And so that tension between these two very different but very fiery in their way characters had gone long since Ganguly stopped playing for Lancashire. So that's what that moment was. So I don't know about tension between the two teams, but certainly between Andrew Flintoff and Saurav Ganguly.
Bowled in! It's all over for India. Flintoff takes his shirt off.
But let's start with the England innings and player of the series Marcus Trescothick, who played a key role in setting England's 325-run total. England had won the toss and decided to bat first. Indian fast bowler Zaheer Khan, who we'll come to in more detail later, had a stroke of luck in the 8th over when Nick Knight missed a full toss and was bowled out for just 14 runs. However, India would not see another wicket for quite some time, and, in typical fashion, Trescothick was smashing anything the vaguest bit offline to the boundary. Together with Nasser Hussain, they put on 185 for the second wicket.
There it is now, Trescothick, bat raised, signals to the crowd and the dressing room. That's his third one-day 100 for England, and he's second at Lord's.
Now, Cool, what did you make of Trescothic's century in this game, and what are your thoughts on that England batting lineup as a whole?
Marcus Trescothick was a superb player. He'd just a couple of years earlier broken into the team, and he and Michael Vaughan to some extent as well were players who Duncan Fletcher, England's coach at the time, who'd taken over when they were ranked the worst team in Test cricket and had just crashed out of their home World Cup. He had identified them not particularly based on their county averages, but based on some indication that they could step up. And Marcus Trescothick had done so. He'd become a feature in the Test and white ball teams, and he's one of very few players who isn't in this current Owen Morgan England setup who could challenge this group and could potentially make a claim to be in England's all-time ODI 11. He had a range of strokes and an aggressive mindset that you didn't see with English openers at the time. He played the spinners very well. He swept very well, and this is a feature of his innings, his 100 at Lord's in this final. He swept Anil Kumble very well. He took on Harbhajan Singh as well. He was very good down the ground. He was very aggressive through the covers. He was a very, in some cases, a non-English style of opener, and because he was a very tall man and a very dominant player. He was a lovely player to watch as well. Certainly, I think until Moeen Ali came into the England team, Marcus Trescothick is my favourite England player of all time.
When Trescothick's wicket fell to Anil Kumble, England were 227 for 2 in the 37th over. Hussain continued to put runs on the scoreboard, assisted by a quick 40 off 32 cameo from Flintoff, and this match saw Hussain bring up his first, and what would be his only, ODI century.
There's the 100. Nasser Hussain, for the first time in one-day international cricket, points to the number 3 on his back and accepts the plaudits of all around him here at Lord's. Wonderful innings from the England captain.
How important do you guys think that century was, both in the game and for Hussain himself?
He was getting an awful lot of criticism from the Sky commentators, who ironically he would become one of just 2 years later, just after he retired. Particularly Ian Botham and Bob Willis were very down on his performances, his role in the team, the fact that he insisted on batting at number 3 as they saw it. He hadn't, as you say, he hadn't scored a one-day international 100 up until that point. He had a pretty mediocre one-day international record, and he was one of those players who was a beneficiary of the fact that England basically picked the same team across formats. And if you were captain, you were guaranteed to play in all formats, in both formats.
I was actually listening to one of the Sky Sports videos that they did during the first lockdown with Nasser Hussain discussing this game. And basically 2 things that stood out to me from the interview. Nasser Hussain said when he held up those 3 fingers saying effing number 3, Duncan Fletcher, he started laughing, because he thought that he'd held up 2 fingers to the com box, and Duncan Fletcher was like, right, I thought that was your captaincy and cricket career over right there. And the second thing he said was when he reached 30 not out, he already started telling himself, I have to get 100. And he had that thing planned in his head. He said, if I get to 100, I'm going to do that celebration.
For the situation that he came in at and the partnership that he put on, he scored quite slowly. 90 runs per 100 balls is... It's quickish for the time, but it's not, considering that Trescothick and Flintoff were both able to score well over a run a ball through their innings. It was a slightly curious innings, and it was an innings that was very much, one gets the sense that he really, really wanted that 100. And maybe in England, if you're being really harsh, left a few out there.
Thanks to those 2 centuries and that quick 40 from Flintoff, England set a mammoth total of 326 to win. So let's move on to how India started off their challenge. It's worth noting that India had not won a lot of finals up until this point, and that this was their largest run chase to date. But Ganguly and Virender Sehwag gave the team a perfect platform with a century opening partnership. The captain Ganguly got his half-century of just 35 balls.
Got plenty of bat on that. That's racing away up the hill for 4, and that's Ganguly's 50.
It's come in just 35 balls. Brilliant.
I feel like it's fair to say that when we think of Ganguly in this game, we think of, him swinging his shirt around. But what did you guys make of him as a captain and as a batter with how he started off that innings for India?
Sort of Ganguly gets talked about as the captain, as the leader, and now as the BCCI board president. And sometimes he gets talked about as not quite being at the level of Tendulkar, Sehwag, Dravid, Lakshman in Test cricket, which I think is probably fair. He was a very good one-day player, and he holds still a lot of records for India in terms of run scoring, in terms of hundreds, in terms of partnership records. And he really threw caution to the wind in this innings and played with a fluency that even really outdid Trescothick and even Andrew Flintoff, who scored that quick 40. Sehwag and Ganguly started like they were fired from a gun. 100 inside. 15 overs was a big deal at the time. 15 overs was the first power play at the time in one-day international cricket, so you'd only have two players out. So that was something that that teams would target because you'd have more boundary options. And scoring nearly 115 overs would be quite good now. It was very good then. Ganguly even outscored Sehwag in terms of his strike rate, smashing boundaries here, there, and everywhere. He was very good on the through the offside on the up. He sometimes got called the Prince of the Offside in terms of he would drive on the up through the covers, and he would take on Ashley Giles, the left-arm spinner, turning the ball into him. It hit him over mid-wicket. Famously, later this summer, he'd scored 100 at Headingley in a test match where he kept hitting Ashley Giles for 6 over mid-wicket and actually quite injured a spectator quite badly in the crowd later this summer. And on this Lord's pitch, which was quite easy to bat on, quite easy paced, they started fantastically and gave India a certain amount of hope. Although it was Indian fandom being what it was at the time, it was always tinged with a sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
So Ganguly went first, bowled by Alex Tudor, and this left India at 106 for 1 in the 15th over. This then sparked a mini collapse for the team, as India lost 4 wickets for just 40 runs. Sehwag quickly followed Ganguly, and Ronnie Irani picked up the wickets of Mongia and Dravid. Ashley Giles then took the wicket of Tendulkar, who took an outrageous swing at a ball that made no contact with the bat, but plenty with the stumps.
Celebration for England, disappointment for the huge number of Indian fans in the crowd. That might be the death knell for India in this Natwest Series final.
Obviously, a big turning point of that game was when Tendulkar got out. India were only on 146 and they just lost their Fab 5. What do you guys think was going through the players' heads at that moment, and what was going through your heads when that happened?
Throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s, until this batting lineup develops around Sachin Tendulkar, he had been... It's very difficult even now to think of a player who carries their team's hopes to quite that degree. It's ridiculous how much better Sachin Tendulkar was than the rest of that Indian team in the 90s. And so all of this stuff was put on him. There were a lot of instances of he would get out having played a really good innings and India would collapse around him or after him, and he would then get blamed for not winning the game. And I've heard Nasser Hussain say that he thought the game was done. From the Indian point of view, in a sense, there was a sense of Yuvraj and Kaif having nothing to lose at that point.
And interestingly, Mohammad Kaif said in his interview that when India got to 146 for 5 and Tendulkar got out just before that, his parents didn't even wait for him to come out to bat. They just switched off the TV and went to watch a movie. They'd just given up. They were like, yeah, Sachin's out. Not like a son can win us the game anymore, can he? So they shut the TV and went to watch a movie. And can't help but think, imagine if your son is batting and you've given up hope. So imagine what the rest of India must be thinking. So Nasser Hussain was not wrong to think that they'd won the game, because until that point, India had done nothing to show that they could fight and actually go on and win that game.
All seemed pretty lost for India at this point. But it seems that nobody told the young guns this. Yuvraj Singh and Mohammad Kaif, India's middle-order youths, took centre stage, which seems only fitting in such an epic tale. Despite the pressure that comes not only with a final, but with a final that seemed to be going England's way, both played beautifully and brought up their half-centuries at a runner ball.
That's through extra cover, and that's 4 more. What a way to go to 50. 2 glorious strokes. Successive 4s from Yuvraj, and that extra cover drive takes him to 52 from just 53 balls. And 50 for Kaif. So Mohammed Kaif has provided great support. He's going, we say support, but he's going at a runner ball now. 50 from 50.
What do you guys have to say about those brilliant contributions by Singh and man of the match, Mohammed Kaif?
I was watching an Instagram live between Yuvraj Singh and Mohammed Kaif during the first lockdown. They both said that when they started their innings, the one thing that's helped their partnership was the fact that they were very good friends and they played the Under-19 World Cup together and won it. They said that there were times when they weren't even calling for runs. You know, they were just looking at each other's eyes and they knew what to do next.
For some context, I talked about Yuvraj had made an impression on India already. Mohammed Kaif, he was only playing his 18th game. He'd only scored 2 50s up until this point in one-day international cricket. His strike rate was nothing to write home about. His average was okay, but bolstered by a few not outs. He was an unknown quantity. And Viraj talked about the running, that Yuvraj and Kaif were both very quick between the wickets, much more so than any other member of the Indian team. It's always difficult to look back at then, removing what we know now. But Nasser Hussain, or an England captain, does not slow down approaching his milestone now. England don't slack off at the key moment now. A good team at that point goes even harder and tries to kill the game then and there.
Part-time bowler Paul Collingwood eventually got Singh out, leaving India 6 down and needing another 58 or 51 balls to win.
It's top edge, taken. Judah takes the catch.
When Yuvraj got out, I think even at that point, Indian fans, being pessimistic as they were back then, all just thought, okay, the dream's over, Yuvraj is out, game's done.
Kaif continued to play well, and alongside Harbhajan Singh, it felt like India were keeping 10 or so runs ahead of where England would have liked them to be. The game had taken a 180, and it seemed like India were on their way to a comfortable victory. But in yet another twist to this story, Flintoff bowled Harbhajan, and then 2 balls later had Kumble caught behind.
Flintoff does it, clean bowls him. Harbhajan looking for the shot through the offside, is clean bowled for 15. Quick delivery from Flintoff, a peel, up goes the finger, Kumble's going to have to go, Steve Buckner's finger's gone up. India are 8 down.
And then this really sort of frantic end to the game where England started to realise that they could actually lose the game, and then also started to realise that they could win the game as well. Suddenly the crowd gets incredibly loud, and this heat of the day and this sense of something about to happen becomes almost oppressive, and everyone starts slightly losing their heads in England and India alike. And it's summed up perfectly by that winning moment.
Full toss. They go for the signal this time. A throw and a miss. They're going to get back for 2. India are home. Lords goes wild.
There's limbs everywhere. It's absolute chaos. There's no sense of this being a clinical chase at all. It is a win purely based on emotion and on grit and on just getting through, and on one team who never thought they could lose the game, one team who never thought they could win the game.
Let's quickly circle back to something that we've already touched on in this podcast, and that's the iconic moment that came at the end of the game when Ganguly celebrated by taking his shirt off to swing it around his head.
Zahir Khan and Mohammed Kaif have done it. The tension's relieved in the Indian dressing room now. They've played the best cricket in this series. It's Ganguly with his shirt off, Flintoff style this time. Mohammed Kaif not out 87. India have won the Natwest Series final by 2 wickets here at Lords in one of the most incredible one-day matches the country has ever seen.
And of course, it's Andrew Flintoff bowling that last over. Andrew Flintoff is like Zelig or Forrest Gump. He's there at all the big moments in the early to mid 2000s for England, and so he's there as he was at the end in Mumbai earlier that year. He's there at the end in front of that crowd at Lords, and then sort of Ganguly gets his very, very visual revenge.
Do you guys reckon if it wasn't Flintoff bowling the last over, do you reckon Ganguly would have taken his shirt off?
It's such a good question. If it had been Darren Gough, if it had been Alex Tudor bowling that last over, or if they'd won it a little bit earlier, I wonder. Sort of Ganguly is exactly the right kind of petty to do it anyway, and it does seem like this wasn't completely spontaneous from what we have subsequently talked about, or what people have subsequently talked about. So much so that we've heard since that the plan was for the entire team to do this, but Rahul Dravid, being Rahul Dravid, tried to maintain a certain sense of decorum, and the only man he couldn't stop doing it was sort of Ganguly, who had positioned himself very cleverly on the edge of the huddle, on the edge of the balcony, too far away from anyone to stop him.
Yuvraj, I'm still thinking about how Mohammad Kaif's parents just switched the game off when Tendulkar got out. Please tell me there was more to that story. Do you know how they found out about their son's performance?
Basically, everyone came after India won and landed up outside Mohammad Kaif's house, and they saw that there was a lock. So they thought that the family's hiding inside because they don't want to meet new people. And then 5 minutes later, the guard goes, no, they've gone to watch a movie. So they all land up at the movie theater. These bunch of 100, 200 people land up at the movie theater. And basically, Mohammad Kaif's family has to leave the movie hall because it's stopping other people from watching the movie, because there's just so many people making noise outside. And then they realize the Suns won India the game.
Thank you again to Nakul and Yuvraj for hopping on this podcast, and thank you to you guys for listening to our review of the 2002 Natwest Series final. We hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to check out more of the Sports Gazette's podcasts and give us a follow for some more amazing content and more Remember Where You Were moments.
Full toss. They go for the single this time. A throw and a miss. They're going to get back for two. India are home. Lords goes wide.